So we heard earlier today that the future of AI has to do with sharing. We heard earlier in the morning that it has to do with sharing resources and technical tools. We heard about the sharing of data, which is very important. And we also know the value of sharing cutting-edge AI research, which is what the previous panel offered for us. And Stanford and AIMI are setting the tone in that conversation. Another critical aspect is sharing knowledge on how these AI tools are shaping the landscape of business and entrepreneurship in health. So this is crucial for everybody who is involved in the health ecosystem. I am a professor and I specialize in strategy and entrepreneurship. And my passion is to examine what matters when these AI tools enter real-world settings in health. And I do that research in the UK, USA, China, and Canada with my research team. So with this background, it's my pleasure and great honor to introduce to you a panel of AI industry experts who are willing to share with us their knowledge about the new emerging business and entrepreneurship landscape and what will matter in that landscape. And please do not hold back your questions. We have them, and we would be very happy to learn from them their secret recipes. So the way that I'm going to structure this conversation going forward is that I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and also to share with us what is their view on what is cutting edge right now in the health AI landscape, because much has changed since last year's conversation, right? And then following their introductions, I have some targeted questions for them, and I will save lots of time for your questions. With that in mind, let's get started with our introductions, please.
Hello, everyone. Very pleased to be here. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Natalia Vassilieva. Currently, I'm Vice President and Field CTO at Cerebras Systems. For those who doesn't know, Cerebras is a startup based here in Silicon Valley, and we are building the new generation of computer systems to train generative AI models. So we're building very, very big processors and the whole software stack to enable that. My background is not in the hardware. My background is actually, I'm applied mathematician and computer scientist by training. So I've started working with computer vision, information retrieval, natural language processing 20 years ago, before the whole rise of deep learning. Got interested into how to make those algorithms run efficiently on the hardware, and that's what brought me to Cerebras. And currently in my role, I'm responsible for joint projects that we are doing with a wide variety of customers. And we have some customers in healthcare and medical domains. And honestly, these projects are among my favorites, not only because of the impact and not only because of the kind of promise of what can be done, when you bring together experts with different backgrounds and in this particular area, but also because of the kind of challenges and technical difficulties and advances that you can bring to this area. So it's very interesting in all aspects of what we are doing. So very happy to be here to share with you some of that.
Natalia, I'm not going to let you off the hook. What's cutting edge since last year?
I think cutting edge, at least in my opinion, maybe I will sound not novel. I believe that foundational models is cutting edge. And to me, it's fascinating what you can do when you bring multiple modalities together. So when you can intermingle data which is coming from completely different data sources with completely different modalities and find patterns across those things. So one of the projects, for example, that we are doing with Mayo right now, we are looking at predictions of patient response to a specific drug used to treat rheumatoid arthritis. And for that, you need to look into patient data, into DNA, into X-rays, and you try to make sense out of all of that. As humans, we cannot do that. And the capabilities that those new foundational models bring to the table are, to me, really fascinating.
Thank you, Natalia.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for having me. I'm Justin Norden. I'm a physician and computer scientist by background, and I'm CEO of a company called Qualified Health. where we're working with health systems to deploy AI safely, figuring out governance, evaluation, guardrails, and monitoring to actually deploy these algorithms at scale. But before that, I was a partner at GSR Ventures doing early stage healthcare AI investing. This is the area I've been tracking for a long time. It's been fun being part of events like this for many, many years at Stanford. And I've been fascinated kind of watching this space evolve and move over time, so much so that decided to jump back to the other side of the table again to start this company. Before that, I ran a company called Trustworthy AI. Literally, that was the name. That was what we trademarked. We pivoted out of healthcare at the time because people weren't really ready to deploy AI at scale. So we wrote papers on the topic, but it wasn't there yet. We pivoted that company to the autonomous vehicle space, ended up selling that company to Waymo, where it's part of their safety simulation evaluation infrastructure. Also joined faculty here at Stanford as an adjunct professor in bioinformatics, so I get to teach brilliant young students on digital health and generative AI in medicine. And in terms of what's cutting edge today, I would say since last year, there was just pure excitement. Oh my gosh, these tools are going to fix everything. We can use them for everything. And what's cutting edge now is people realize it's hard. It's actually probably easier to build a demo and build a new model than it is to actually show what that performance is like in a real-world healthcare setting. And so people are starting to realize that this is hard. Regulations are starting to come out. Office of Civil Rights, as of a few weeks ago, is holding health systems. Liability came up on the last panel. Responsible, not vendors, health systems responsible for what they choose to deploy. And so the field is evolving fast on what it actually means to go from demo to production. And so I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that today.
Hi, I'm Ankur Sharma. I'm the head of medical affairs for digital radiology at Bayer. I'm an engineer turned physician, internist in the world of data scientists and radiologists. And for the past decade, I have been in the medical device industry. I've worked on everything from orthopedics to small bone fixation to robotic surgical equipment. And interestingly, I spent a bunch of time in suture development, which isn't as fascinating as you would think, but it turns out is pretty fascinating. And now for the last 2.5 years, I've been in AI as a medical device, software as a medical device in this space. I think the question around what's interesting is if you were to ask me last year, I would said, oh, all these triage tools, the detection tools, the LLMs that are being used, that was kind of interesting. And now I think what's really interesting is they're being used, but people are actually asking about the data behind it and the transparency because people want to actually know about how they use and implement those in clinical care, as opposed to just taking them as face value of, okay, this helps me solve a problem, or this is the clinical use case that I can use this application for, and that helps me with my patient for A, B, C, or D. And that transparency and understanding of growth in terms of the people who are purchasing the algorithms, as well as the people who are using them, shows that there is an increase in education behind them, which means that as they get better users, we'll have better applications that can then enable some of the better power that some of these previous talks were talking about, right? And generative space and multimodal space. As you have those powerful users behind it, you can get more out of those applications. And I think that's where we are now.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Morgan Cheatham. I'm an investor with Bessemer Venture Partners, which is a large global venture firm that's been investing in healthcare and life sciences in a dedicated fashion for the last 40 years. And I'm also, like others on the panel, an aspiring physician informatician. I'm a fourth-year medical student at Brown. And in addition to some of these things, I'm also representing the New England Journal of Medicine AI, where I serve on the editorial team. And frankly, I have the privilege of a front row seat to reading a lot of the great work that folks in this room and across the Stanford ecosystem are submitting to the journal. So please keep that up. And then also serve as a board director at the Coalition for Health AI, which also is a Stanford-affiliated organization, but broadly is a convening organization focused on developing frameworks for safe, effective, and ethical use of AI in biomedicine. And we have Dr. Nigam Shah from Stanford here, also on the board of directors there. I think we're at a very special time in the field, and many of the folks in this room probably feel like this moment is an overnight success 50 years in the making, right? Many of the folks in this room have laid the foundation that we're building upon today. We are at a time where a single paper can launch a company, and as we saw in 2017, a single paper has now launched thousands of companies. When I think about what's cutting edge, I think about a few different components. One is obviously on the research side, where so much of our inspiration as investors comes from. there's the sexy stuff, like the methods work that we're talking about today. And in that realm, I think the notion of compound AI systems, going from a single model architecture to an orchestra or a series of models that are in conversation with one another and really understanding what's possible there. I'm inspired by a lot of the research on a mixture of experts and the performance benefits that we're seeing on biomedical tasks in that domain. But I also think the unsexy stuff is important. So we think about some of the work that folks like Justin are doing on the validation side, benchmark development, right? I was one of the co-authors on the paper that showed that ChatGPT could pass the USMLE for the first time. And I wish I could go back in time and rewrite that paper and say, this is a cool paper, but it fails on the point of showing any sort of utility at the point of care for clinical medicine. So please accept my addendum. I also think that on this panel, I hope we spend some time talking about what's also cutting edge on the business model side. The elephant in the room is that half of hospital systems in the US are margin negative, right? The average hospital, not Stanford, spends about $8 million a year on IT. If you look at the top 25, that's closer to 150 million. So there's certainly a broad, almost a bimodal distribution there. But who's going to pay for this stuff, right? It's not coming off the provider balance sheet. Payers aren't lining up to pay for it. Pharma has deep pockets, but are they going to pay for it if it's not related to a trial or increasing script lift for one of their therapies? So anyway, I will get off this tangent, but those are some of the cutting edge questions that we're grappling with internally at Bessemer and that I'd love to talk to my fellow panelists about today. Thank you.
And they won't disappoint. We have some questions for them along those lines as well. But I'm going to start off with a question for Natalia, actually, because the previous panel brought us right in the middle of the conversation of what is latest in terms of generative AI. I would be wondering to ask you if the aim is to get those generative AI tools out of the computer science labs and into the hands of clinicians and other stakeholders in healthcare, what is it that we could do upstream in order to facilitate that? What are the specific requirements?
I feel like that question hadn't been staged after Morgan's previous talk, because what I was going to say...
Really accidental.
No, but I was going to say that essentially in my mind, benchmarks is the most important thing. And what we are learning right now, again, I'm a computer scientist, I'm sitting in a lab, I'm training that model. There is no way I can interact. Yes, we are privileged to work with clinicians and to get their inputs, but I cannot go to them every day or every week and say, okay, could you evaluate this next version of my model, this next version of my model? It's impossible. So we're using our own benchmarks to track progress. And the benchmarks which we are using, I understand that now they're not always, so almost never, correlate with how that model will be used in the field in reality. So to me, development of those measurement tools which can help you to understand if what you are developing in a lab can be actually useful in the field is one of the most important things which we need to jointly work on now. And it can be done even before I start working on the model.
Something that a lot of people who work with organizational issues see a lot. You have to have the system set around you, not just to rely on specific instances of people going above and beyond, which actually sets the stage nicely for the question for Justin. Justin, the question for you is, I'm sorry to say this, but where is the competitive advantage in this new landscape? You are an entrepreneur, you're a successful entrepreneur. I think that's a fair question to ask you of all people.
So it's really hard. And before I jumped over to this side, I was an investor. And I was trying to say, where is there an actual moat? This is the question every VC in Silicon Valley, in healthcare, outside of healthcare, is asking with AI. Where is the moat? Even Google maybe wrote this paper or didn't. It's unclear, a memo saying there's no moat here. We don't have a moat. So what do we do? Where do we look for an advantage? It's also important to realize the technology landscape is changing on a week-by-week basis. Actually, something we started last year for class, just to engage our students, is, hey, submit one interesting thing you saw this week. Now we're teaching this class again this quarter. It is still relevant. Right? OpenAI 2 days ago just had a whole announcement of new models, new ways to interact with these tools that wipe out swaths of startups over time. They complete what Google made announcements yesterday and today, doing the same thing. And so just betting on the technology or a new model development is a really tough game to play unless you happen to have maybe $100 billion in your pocket. And while while Morgan has a lot of money over at Bessemer, he doesn't have that much to invest in a new startup. So then where else do you look? Where else do people in healthcare start to think about this? And I would argue it's actual use of these tools, understanding what's happening, and deep understanding of clinical problems or other hospital operations problems where you can start to build a moat. If you are working as a startup with a health system and showing them success with these tools, are deeply integrated into their workflows and what's happening, they are not going to replace you. Hospitals will often take a year, 2 years to make a decision to partner with a company. The terrible part about that is it takes 2 years to make that happen. But the good part about that is once you're in, once you're showing value, once you're doing so safely and showing that it works, you're likely to stick around for a while. And so companies that form deep partnerships with people they're working with, are deeply integrated into those systems, will last and stay around. The other thing to think about are who are the groups in healthcare that start to shape the conversation for what it looks like. What does safe deployment look like? How should we start to be using these models from physician practices, from industry groups? These groups are going to kind of set the stage for how everyone thinks about AI and deploys AI. And there's not infinite of them. Certain companies will find partnerships with these groups, go deeper, and start to shape the landscape, and they'll have an advantage over their peers for getting to insights first, getting to partners first, and building trust. Ultimately, which is how we actually make changes and start to deploy things in healthcare.
I have a follow-up question. This was asked to me by a reporter, and I stumbled in the response. So I hope you have that response for me, which
Sounds easy then.
Yeah, very easy. Is there still space in this landscape for startup companies to be successful?
So it's a good question. Let's take health systems and AI. There is a world where Epic just eats everything. No startups exist. No one else has a chance. The hyperscalers don't even penetrate well. Maybe Microsoft because they're partnering. That is a world, and we think about probabilities, that has significant probability mass. Epic is the front runner. Every conversation you talk with a health system about Epic comes up. That could exist. However, when you speak with health systems, when you start to see the world, there are enough people who want to move faster. There are enough people who see the significance, probably why all of you are in this room today, of how transformative this technology could be and want to move faster, want to push the envelope, and realize we need to maybe explore a little bit outside kind of the walled ecosystem. So no, I do think there is space for startups to play, and maybe that's just the optimist in me.
And that's a great view to have, which sets actually for this audience, the message to take away is move fast and find your unique angle. Now, which sets up the question for Morgan, actually, which is people come to you with their newest ideas. We heard that you have multiple millions to spend from Justin. So
Billions, I think.
Sorry, yes, of course. I'm sorry, I undersold that. He has a lot of money, guys. So with that in mind, can I ask you very cheekily, how do you assess health AI companies at a time when every single company claims to be doing some element of AI?
Absolutely. Well, so let me just take a step back because I think there's a lot of threads to pull in here. The first is I'd just say that science is backable in all markets. And I always say this because I'm a techno-optimist or would identify as one. And so if you're a company that's actually innovating in the AI methods layer, in the field of AI, I think there's an opportunity. Now, there's a lot of caveats when I say that within the healthcare and life sciences domains. One of the first questions you want to ask yourself when a company's pitching you is, to Justin's point, why would I invest in this company over just buying NVIDIA stock? If you come to me and you tell me that half the capital you're raising is going to NVIDIA, then wouldn't NVIDIA potentially be a more interesting investment? And I say that as a joke, but in seriousness, the way that we've thought about it at Bessemer is there's a real distinction between a company that is AI first and a company that is AI enabled. And I draw the distinction on the AI first is a company that is focused on innovating in AI as a core business activity. What does that mean? You are going to capitalize your company differently. You're going to hire for that company differently. You might have a chief scientific officer. You're going to be hiring AI scientists. You're going to be publishing papers. It's a very different orientation than what we also see, which are alternative ways of building an AI company, which are the AI enabled, which means you might be a practitioner of implementation. You may not be innovating on the methods of a core task that your company is solving, but you have an adeptness at weaving together, back to the music analogy, the various instruments that are going to produce a beautiful concert. And in healthcare, I think the most important thing, whether you're AI first or AI enabled, and the best moat is actually solving a problem that someone cares about, right? If you're going to a hospital and you're selling them diagnosis, but that CFO or that chief nursing officer's main problem is that they can't keep clinicians employed, or they're worried about burnout, you're selling the wrong thing, right? And there may be a time for that clinical diagnostic product, but you have to think about the positioning. And so that's the one thing I think about is if you're selling in healthcare, unfortunately, you have to make sure that what you're working on is a top 1, 2, or 3 problem for the stakeholder who's buying your product, point blank. I think the second thing is that, as Justin alluded to, healthcare is an industry that's governed by what I like to call data landlords or distribution landlords. There's massive multi-billion-dollar companies that have been around for 50 years, in some cases hundreds of years, that in some cases have 95% market share. I won't name which company that is. It's not been mentioned today, but there are companies in our industry that have that level of market share. The brilliant strategy that I'm seeing AI companies pursue is recognizing that those incumbents are unlikely to ever be able to recruit, retain, and inspire the brightest minds coming from Stanford and other institutions in AI. And so if you can establish distribution partnerships with those organizations, we've seen that be quite fruitful. And I'll give one example before turning it over to the others. We're investors in a company called Abridge, which is an ambient dictation company that was founded by the marriage of a physician and a computer scientist from Carnegie Mellon. This is an AI-first company, so they're actively innovating at that methods layer. And they struck one of the first partnerships that a startup has ever established with Epic. And so they are now kind of riding shotgun as a core partner alongside Nuance that Epic is supporting in a very deeply integrated fashion. And I can tell you, this has allowed them to experience new logo growth in ways that have been unprecedented in healthcare. And so I think that level of alignment on the distribution side is critical for companies and for technologists that are thinking about deploying AI in the real world.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. I still haven't got the hang of this thing. Yes, it works now. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's very nice that we also have very specific examples of from your portfolio. What I would like to ask both you and Justin, if possible, is to share with us your view about, from an investor perspective and from an entrepreneur perspective, there's this pressure to meet the needs of the market and the incentives of the market. And at the same time, we hear voices increasingly around responsible AI, equity, and how can one balance those two when you're thinking about investing and starting a new entrepreneurial activity? Justin?
Yeah, I can start with that. It is an interesting time when regulation is starting to come out to demand this. It's markets often, Morgan talked a lot about incentives, and when I teach my classes, because it breaks my heart when, especially clinicians spend years and years developing something, that spend their life savings on it, and never thought about the business model upfront, because healthcare is complicated, and when you look at the incentives for how we pay for things, as much as we often pretend, no, it's just about the clinical care, it's just about the clinical outcomes, when you look at the data, it's not how people are acting. The incentives really, really do matter. And what's fortunate for talking about equity, bias, these other tools, is it's starting to come up in the incentives. Right? There are policies now. It wasn't going to be my first guess, but the Office of Civil Rights within the year has the ability to start suing systems for not checking for bias. So we're starting to see these checks and balances come up. There's starting to be payment codes in certain places for measurement for health equity outcomes. So these things that for years and years have been talking points are now starting to have carrots and sticks attached to them, which will start to drive behavior. So I'm actually optimistic that we've gone from talking about it to having real incentives to make this happen. And that will drive startup opportunities to meet these incentives. It will drive systems to force vendors to show how they're complying with these new rules. And so I'm cautiously optimistic that things will keep moving in this direction.
Thank you for that. I share your optimism on that front, actually. I'm going to save some time for the last question, which is going to go to Dr. Sharma, Ankur. And you know, when it's the last question from me, it's going to probably not be the most pleasant one. So,
Lucky me.
Ankur, lucky you. Well, you're a physician, and you shared with us that you're also leading the initiative for the deployment of an AI platform into established large health organizations and systems. So the obvious question there that everybody is curious about is, how do you think about and how do you assess return on investment, which is something that we all care about and will be asked about at some point?
Yeah, easy question. I think some of it, to start, even though, goes back to the development of applications and whether or not companies have ability to start up and what are they trying to solve, what is the problem they're trying to solve. And to Morgan, to your point, if you're coming into the space, are you collaborating with somebody in the space so that you're deploying your algorithm in the right place for what you're trying to do? And sometimes that can be hard if there's an Epic sitting there. But sometimes it's easy to find a good collaborative partner, multiple startups or a large industry partner that you can work with to kind of get in the right space. Then when you use those applications, you really have to think about who is it benefiting, right? The user of the application may not be the actual beneficiary of it. In some of the examples we saw earlier about multimodal AI and what they're doing from an imaging perspective to do a report, and sure, that maybe helps the radiologist, but really the benefit of some of those might be for the orthopedist who's treating. And so we have to analyze who's actually benefiting. And the traditional way we do reimbursement in healthcare is, outcomes based, or what is the endpoint, and how do I actually put a billable piece to that with a code or whatever it might be that I'm doing. And there's a lot of tangible things that AI will do for us, but is not necessarily linked to a significant outcome. It could be just improving our reporting to make it more standardized, so another tool in the future can take that, structured data and implement it for another piece somewhere downstream. Or it might be something that the administrative side is using to determine how they deploy physicians in different places based on patient flow, right? And then there's also all these algorithms that go to the patient and get them in on time, get them ready for whatever their procedure is. All those kinds of tools, they all have different methodologies of kind of where the benefit sits. And so if we think about those different benefits and where they are, if we can think about who's actually benefiting, then we have to think about, well, is that really saving me money? Am I getting additional revenue from, because of this tool, now I'm getting another code or another procedure? Those are a little bit easier to quantify from an ROI perspective, because you can say, great, every 5 procedures I get an extra $1,000, whatever, and that's where I can drive the value for this algorithm. But those other ones we have to really think about, because they're driving other value for our health system as a whole. And we talked about earlier, right? Like there was a discussion about shortages, people, time. Those are all still things that we have to quantify. And once upon a time, we didn't really quantify time savings well, because it was kind of an imaginary thing. Like the doctor's there anyway, so of course he's going to be there for 12 hours. And whether he saves 10 minutes or an hour, great. But now we have a very different volume of patients and people. And so those time savings are something that we have to consider as well. And how do you put a dollar value on that? It's a big question to still be determined. Yeah.
Thank you for letting us have a look under the hood of how you're thinking about it. As you pointed out, value is not just the dollar sign. And until we have ways of measuring value, it's very difficult to determine which of these tools are going to add the most value. And we also know that sometimes with all new innovations, we don't really know exactly what the value will be until quite later in time, once we've been using them for a while. So that's also an open question there. I feel that this is a good time to open the floor for the audience's questions. Please don't be shy. They've promised to share, and they have been very forthcoming with their knowledge so far. We have a question online first. Okay, sure.
So one of the questions online is collaboration is essential for innovation. How do you foster collaboration between AI developers, health providers, research, health systems, and regulatory bodies?
Okay, we'll split that question in two. I would like to hear from Natalia about the developers part, please.
I think it also comes back to incentives. As a developer, I'm interested in seeing value from my algorithm. I want that to be deployed and to bring something good for the people. So I'm incentivized to work to understand what that need is. So I'm incentivized to work with clinicians and to understand what they need, or whoever needs something to be fixed with algorithms. Have probably less answer about regulations, and maybe that's also more in our, at least in our setup. I think clinicians are the ones who are mostly on the clinic side, the ones who are working with regulations. But there's definitely desire towards the common goal is what incentivizes the collaboration. Because without them, I understand that my algorithm will be useless. Nobody is interested in that.
That's a great way of looking at it. Thank you. Morgan, you're working with regulators, actually.
Yeah, so I'll speak to this in two parts briefly. So at the Coalition for Health AI, I chair the committee that's focused on startup and investment communities. And so what that means is in front of, for the board, on behalf of the board, it is my role to surface the urgent concerns of entrepreneurs and of investors as it relates to developing healthcare AI, deploying it in the wild, and building companies in the category. And so I can tell you that these conversations are happening across the country with the coalition. We have over 2,000 members now and are launching 5 working groups actually over the next month, which we welcome folks' applications for those. And so again, it takes, I think, a vested interest and frankly a formal space to be having these conversations, and then a level of transparency around what we're actually developing and building. So we'll be publishing a number of these guidelines later in the fall, not to publish and pat ourselves in the back, but to publish and seek the community's feedback. So that's kind of one angle. The second thing I'll just say briefly is the beauty of starting a company in this space is that, and Justin can speak to this, all of these different personalities collide. Like some of the most inspiring healthcare AI companies or bio AI companies are those where there is a single pane of glass between a radiologist and an AI developer and a bioethics expert, right? And so if you're thinking about starting a company, I would, from the ground up, really think about building that multilingual representation on your team at the founding level to ensure that all of those voices are represented.
Which is excellent advice. And Ankur, I think that your team actually has put that together, and this is exactly what you're doing right now.
Yeah, so I was going to say there's a couple things from a collaborative front, right? There's the data, and what data are you willing to share? I think there's a little bit of reluctance on transparency and data sharing when you're developing an algorithm or collaborating that make it sometimes difficult. We recently launched a partnership with Google to help developers actually take their ideas from concept all the way to production and provide access to medical, regulatory, all these expertise that maybe some small startups may not have access to. And the idea is really if we can give people access to the right expertise, it can help them develop better applications. And if you are willing to share data, then we can help you also find the right partners in data transparency. One of the pieces to that, though, is we're always a little concerned in the AI and the healthcare space about regulations, but not all of the regulations are for all of the tools. So it's really important to understand what is the use case, and then make sure that you're applying the right regulatory pathway and the right quality metrics so that you're not overburdening your development, but you're also not valuing what you're putting out there. And so that means that you have to have the right people in the room to share that knowledge. And there's plenty, I think, in the space that are recognizing the need to do this. So there's definitely ways to find strong partnerships there.
And Justin, you are a boundary crosser in yourself. So do you feel that, would you like to add something?
I think the fortunate thing, and judging by why this room is full, is people are so interested in this topic that people want to come together, right? It speaks to groups like CHAI. There's a number of groups that have come forward where people are so worried about these issues and want to do something. So fortunate, and the regulators are coming forward and joining these discussions as well. So fortunately, AI is such a hot button issue that these conversations are happening today.
That's fantastic. Thank you, everyone. We have a question from the audience. Would you mind, please, when you ask a question, to introduce yourselves first? So that would make it easier.
Thank you so much for your comments. I'm Michelle Mello. I'm a professor here in the medical school and the law school. I wanted to push you to answer a little bit more the question about how we make these technologies affordable, and in particular, give me the perspective of the industry on issues around price discrimination, differential pricing for health systems that have different resources. I am not hearing any payers lining up to pay more for services because they're AI enhanced. And so presuming that we continue to live in a world for some time where that does not happen, are you hearing a willingness within the industry to engage in discounting and other measures to make these technologies reachable by rural and low margin health systems?
Maybe as the industry guy on the panel, I'll start. Luckily, we have some very intelligent people who think about that far more than I do in our company. But yes, I think the short answer is yes. There is a willingness to understand what is the need and what is the benefit and how can we actually price appropriately to get that benefit. And that goes back to kind of also what I was saying in terms of understanding what is the problem that we're solving, what is the intended use of the algorithm. But that health equity and how do we make sure that it's not just being used at the top hospitals. The top hospitals probably have the ability to go and develop their own algorithms and find what they want and get where they want to go. But that's not where a majority of patients go. And so I think there is a willingness, I know there is a willingness from my space to kind of how do we meet those smaller hospitals or healthcare systems in terms of making it affordable so that they're still receiving that benefit. Part of that also, I think, goes into the transparency of the data earlier, because the challenge that we're also seeing is that some of these algorithms are built on data sets that come from some of these larger institutions may not be applicable to these smaller sites. So there's a data inequality there that also has to be addressed. And that's where the transparency on that data will help then make sure that we get models that will work in these rural sites or inequitable populations. But so it's a double whammy there. But I think the industry is trying to approach that appropriately, as best as they can.
I'll jump in and say I'm actually more optimistic about these tools reaching lower resource settings for a couple of reasons. One, there will be more, my prediction, and we don't have all these outcomes yet, but there will be more bang for our buck to implement these tools. The potential we're starting to see now on productivity improvements, back office staff replacement, automated workflows is higher, candidly, than technology we were seeing before. And what people are able to do, if you believe that, you can start to take risk. And you can start to say, hey, don't pay us now. We're going to do implementation, or maybe we'll take a tiny fee to get going. But then when we achieve these outcomes, which traditionally AI companies failed. Like AI companies made big promises, they couldn't do it. But I predict we're going to start to see some pretty transformative benefits over the coming years. And then what that allows for is, hey, we're actually going to replace a bunch of your IT vendor solutions. You're paying millions and millions of dollars for legacy systems built 20 years ago, which actually could be replaced by an API call. And so you're going to start to see risk-based contracts for these systems. And I actually predict some of them will move faster than the large AMCs. Some of them know they don't have the AI talent and so want to outsource it. And so actually, AI will move actually pretty fast, I'm hoping and optimistic, across the board for health systems who choose to play in this space and maybe choose to do so in a risk-bearing way.
I think that's pretty spot on when you think about the administrative side, but maybe not on the clinical side. The clinical side, I think it's the opposite, where it's reluctant still.
Sorry, the clinical side is reluctant across the board.
Natalia?
I just want to make sure that we're talking,
No, I just wanted to add that I'm actually quite optimistic, and I surely don't believe that someone will use AI-based tool just for the sake of using AI-based tool, but you will use that tool if it either provides you better diagnostics or there are cost saving underneath. When talking about small institutions, large hospitals, right now, yes, you need some investment into yet figuring out how to use those tools, and there is still a lot of development and research and development going on. And maybe we can accept that large hospitals who have deeper pockets can pay for those programs, but then when we realize actually how exactly to use those, which tools are working, which tools are not working, it will be much easier and much cheaper to deploy in small institutions, and small institutions will be incentivized to do that because they will also see the value, and at the end of the day, I think it will be cost efficient for them too.
That's an interesting perspective. Thank you for that, Natalia. The second question?
Yep. My name is Nagesh Malagari, and I work with a technology and strategy consulting firm. Thanks for all your comments. Question to the industry experts is more in terms of product market fit, right? there is a lot of innovation happening from AI side. People are trying to build products. Building products is one thing, but market adoption piece, trying to make sure that it's properly employed so that the value is recognized and captured. How do you kind of like advise entrepreneurs in this room or others who are building these products on what kind of problems to attack first? Maybe top 3 priorities from a pharma side or healthcare provider side or even payer side.
So the question is, what advice would you have for researchers, students, or physicians who are seeking to venture into the space of health AI?
Yes, primarily like a set of key problems where there would be immediate adoption.
Oh, lovely. Another easy question. Who wants to have this one?
I'm happy to.
Wait.
Oh, you.
Morgan,
No,
please,
you're
go ahead.
living it. Go for it.
We kind of do this on a daily basis, right? How do we find the right application for... One thing that we started doing was actually mapping different patient workflows as opposed to clinical workflows, because we know the clinical workflows, but where are the patient workflows and where do they touch, solvable problems versus also pain points? So if you look at a breast care pathway versus maybe a cardiac pathway or a neuro, they all have different touch points. And where we found that there was gaps that were challenges that could be resolved with an AI, that's where we started. And kind of go for the low-hanging fruit first. And then from there you realize, okay, now we can take that low-hanging fruit and then we'll look at what's on the market. Because a lot of other companies have actually looked at the low-hanging fruit and said, okay, here's where we've started. We can then do an analysis and say, let's compare the 5 that are on the market with the publicly available data, or maybe do some analyses. And then we say, okay, well, that gets us step 1. What's step 2 beyond that, where we have an opportunity? So it's really understanding where you are now, and then how do you want to get to the next space in that workflow for that patient or clinical care pathway. It's a little bit easier when you're breaking it down that way.
Thank you
From
for
our
the great
perspective.
explication. Morgan?
Yeah, I might add, in biology, I would say the most interesting application is to build a full stack therapeutics company where you're leveraging AI in various aspects of the discovery and development process, but the end value of the company, strong opinions loosely held, lies in the medicine, okay? I think on the healthcare side, this is a very boring take, but the back office stuff will certainly be addressed first, whether it's thinking about revenue cycle management, although I'd be the first person to also say that if this is a transformative moment in technology that everyone in this room agrees upon, and the best thing we can come up with is a better coding system, in 5 years we will have failed. So you have to look beyond. So back office, RCM, coding, there's really interesting work being done in cybersecurity. I think a lot about, and I'll end on this comment, what makes a platform company, right? The reason to start in the back office is because it's subclinical, so the regulatory environment might be more forgiving. And it's also a hair on fire problem as it relates to operational ROI, whether that's financial, time savings, and we discussed some of those others. It's also a great opportunity to build trust as a company. If you can do the back office well, we might allow you a shot on goal to try the front office. But if you think about what makes a great platform company, you take Apple as an example. The first time you use their product, it's amazing. It's 10x better than everything else. And sorry to the Android users in the room. But then they have other products. They have the watch, they have the AirPods, they have the iPad, they have the MacBook. And it's really that beautiful choreography across all of the products that makes them a platform. And I think something very similar will play out in healthcare. And that company's not yet been built. But those that can enter the back office and build trust and earn the right to work on the high science, the clinical, the scientific, I think we'll be able to build a very interesting platform company over the next 5 to 10 years.
I want to say a big thank you to all the panelists for sharing with us their vision of how this business landscape is going to be shaped over the next year, or less, even sooner. And I also want to say that if there's one takeaway from everybody that spoke today, is this idea that in this new landscape, trust is business in a sense. So if you have to prioritize one thing, it's that. I'm very sorry we don't have time for more questions. I welcome you to have conversations with our panelists right after this. And thank you so much for your attention and for being here today. All of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.